The kid, Ted, that I was playing Half-Life with, while I was in the Navy during my second deployment, he was the passenger of somebody who was driving drunk. And this kid skid off the road and hit a telephone pole. My friend Ted died. The driver lived. So the driver essentially killed my friend. And nobody told me about it while I was on deployment because they didn't want me to be upset. It was the first of my friends to pass away. And then when I came back, one of my other friends, his name was Luke, he ended up in rehab. He was on heroin. My other friend John ended up as like an alcoholic. Like all these people just, I don't know what it was, man. All these people just ended up like hooked on heroin or alcohol, and that was it. A lot of people from my high school ended up addicted to heroin. Between 2005 and 2015, there was like a really big heroin epidemic. I'm from like Long Island, New York, and that's where I moved after Queens. And on Long Island, there was like a huge heroin epidemic between 2005 2015. It started with like the doctors overprescribing Oxycontin and Percocets and Vicodin and stuff to their patients. And then everyone started getting addicted to those, and those pills are opiates. When people ran out of money or couldn't afford the pills anymore, then they turned to heroin because heroin's cheaper, it's made from opiates also, and it's just as addictive. A lot of people turned into heroin addicts, and my friend Dave, he kept injecting himself in the same arm over and over and over again. And he had this gash on his arm that literally looked like a vagina. That's how many times he kept injecting the same spot over and over again. He had this like disgusting wound. 2 years after having that kind of gash, he just died. He died. I joined the Navy in 2006 and I was gone until 2010. And when I came back to New York and I was living on Long Island again, it must have been like 2012. And that's when I started hearing about a lot of different people getting into heroin and all this other stuff. A lot of people I knew were like overdosing, and I don't know, they were just, it just sucks. So, I don't know. It was really shitty situation all around for all these people. It's really crazy to think about it. Like, my parents moved me out of Queens because the neighborhood was getting bad. And what happened was we went from like weed to heroin. And so all the people that I knew in Queens ended up doing fine in life. And all the people in Long Island in these like nice suburbs and shit ended up as like heroin addicts. It's a really weird dichotomy to think about. And they were like given everything in life. Like these are, spoiled, rotten, suburban fucking kids that were just given everything. And they all ended up on heroin and just tossing their lives away. The thing is, like in high school, I was only smoking weed because that's what I knew from Queens. And what happened was my friends started doing opium and they started doing heroin in high school. And at the time, World of Warcraft like came out like a couple of years ago. So like World of Warcraft became my drug. Like I honestly stopped hanging out with a lot of my high school friends because they were getting really deep into like certain drugs that I knew were bad. Like I knew heroin and I knew popping pills and shit were like really bad. So because they moved on from like weed to like harder drugs like heroin and stuff, I like just stopped talking to a lot of them. Like, at the time we were experimenting with salvia, LSA, like those are two things. And then my friend was like asking me to smoke. He was asking me to do opium with him. I knew what pills and heroin were, but like at the time I didn't know they were all derived from like opiates. So I didn't know what opium was. And the way he explained it to me, he's like, yeah, last time I did opium, it felt like I was doing karate in slow motion. And he made it sound like this really like fun, awesome thing. Meanwhile, it's this like insanely addictive fucking drug. Honestly, socialization for me at the time became World of Warcraft. Like World of Warcraft honestly helped me avoid like heroin, basically. Because my entire group of friends in high school, must have been like 10 people I was very close with, all ended up as heroin addicts. Every single one of them that I knew. I think drug dealers from like the city and other parts of the state, or even in Long Island itself, they saw that these doctors were prescribing pills to everyone and causing this heroin epidemic. If there's a demand for something, you just supply it and you'll make money. So they just saw a demand for heroin as a cheaper alternative to prescription pills, because that's essentially what heroin is. It's just a cheaper alternative to prescription pills. And so that's why a lot of people ended up doing heroin, because like heroin's like $5 a bag. It's like dirt fucking cheap. And like prescription pills are really expensive and hard to come by.
Wait, is heroin actually only $5? What?
From what I understand, it's like $15 like a bag or something. It's like really dirt cheap. Like when you want to get high, it's like nothing. Because here's the thing, and this is why it really spread in the suburbs too, right? Because a lot of these kids, they were like star athletes, right? A lot of these kids, they were like, some of them were like star athletes. They were doing really well in school. And what would happen is sometimes they would get injured and they would go to the doctor, and the doctor's like, oh, you broke your leg. Here's like 20 fucking Vicodin or 40 fucking Vicodin. Here's a bunch of Percocets or Oxycontin for your broken leg. So these kids would take it as prescribed by their medical professional, and by the time they were done with the dose, they were completely addicted. If you do a medically prescribed dose of Oxycontin for about a week, you could potentially become addicted to it. There's like a high probability you might become addicted to it, even if you're just doing Oxycontin for a week. So a lot of these kids, they were like star athletes, and they would get injured. The doctors would prescribe them pills. They'd be taking the pills, they end up addicted to it, and then they have a craving for it, or they make up a lie because they're so addicted at that point. They make up a lie to get more. Then they start giving it to their friends at parties or whatever. Then these other kids become addicted to it. This happens to multiple kids in like multiple school districts, and then all of a sudden, like even the parents too. Like the parents go to their doctors, the doctors prescribe pills. Like that's really what it came from. Like the heroin epidemic in the United States happens because of doctors. Doctors overprescribed fucking opiates and pills to kids and parents who were just told, hey, trust your doctors. The doctors overprescribed these fucking medicines. People got addicted to them. And then when they ran out of the prescription pills, they moved to heroin. A lot of people became fucking heroin addicts, man. Like, it just destroyed a lot of families. I just kind of thought of the Navy as like a fresh start for myself. I had a lot of issues with my parents and stuff, and basically I got kicked out of my house, like by my parents. I just wanted a fresh start with everything, like between these kids like that I knew as friends, you know, getting into heroin, between my parents kicking me out of the house. I was just like, fuck everything, you know, I'm just gonna go in, it's gonna be a fresh start for my life, this is what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna leave everything behind. I don't want to really hear about anything. My parents immigrated from Italy. They had this old school mentality when I graduated high school, like, hey, you're an adult now, get out of the house and, you know, be your own person. And I was trying to explain to them, like, hey, you know, cost of living is not what it was like in the 80s. How do you expect me to survive? And they're like, well, you know, you could just become a waiter and afford your own apartment and get your own car and all this other stuff. I'm like, it doesn't work like that anymore. I'm not gonna be able to do anything. I'm 17 years old. I don't even think I could like serve drinks right now. I don't know. They also had this like idea in their head that I was like failing high school. I don't know what it was. They just were like convinced that I was like failing high school, and I wasn't. I had like a 3.2 average. I mean, it wasn't amazing, but it wasn't bad. You know, it was pretty like average grade. But they were like kind of convinced that I was like failing high school, and they were just like, hey, you know, you graduated high school now, you're an adult. So I'm like, yeah, I'm still 17 though. I really can't afford to be on my own. Throughout that summer after I graduated high school, they made my life like absolute hell. They made it very clear that they did not want me living in their house at all. And when I look back at it, you know, 17 years old, like that's like a kid in my eyes. So it's just really weird. If I had a kid and when they're 17, I'm not kicking them the fuck out of the house. I mean, it's ridiculous. That's why I joined the Navy. I mean, I joined the Navy because I wanted to avoid homelessness. My parents were like dead set on kicking me out of the house. I couldn't afford college. I didn't get any assistance from my parents or anything like that. I had no way out of anything. I had no option to go to school. I had no option to live on my own. I had no option to live with my parents. So what was I gonna do? I just felt like my back was against the wall. So I joined the military. I didn't know anything about loans. That's what's really fucked up. Like, nobody taught me shit. Like, nobody taught me about loans. Like, I didn't know I could take out loans to go to school. I had no idea about that. Nobody fucking told me, like, yeah, you could take out loans and go to school and then pay for them later. When I looked at, like, the cost of college, I was like, oh, it's like $40,000 a year. How the fuck am I gonna pay for $40,000 a year? I'm making like $10 an hour. Like, you know, that was my thought process, like, as a kid. Like, I didn't know what the fuck was going on. It just sucks, man. That's why I can't do mushrooms, bro. Because I got so much, like, deep shit in my head that I don't want to think about. And I feel like the last time I did mushrooms, man, I punched a hole through a fucking door. Like, I got so mad at shit. It wasn't a pretty sight. This sounds like this is a really pussy thing to say, but I was watching the Umbrella Academy the other day. One of the characters, he's talking to like his boyfriend or something, and he's telling him not to join the military. He's like, you know, you're only gonna join the military so that you could prove that you're a man to yourself and your parents. But in the end, these wars are just gonna kill you and they're gonna like break you down or something like that. Something along those lines. And it really got to me because it just reminded me of my situation, how like I felt like I joined the military, not only just because I was angry at everything, but also to prove my parents wrong. To prove to my parents that I wasn't a failure like they thought of me. It's fucked up. Like I joined the military in the height of the Iraq War, specifically out of financial need and to just prove to my parents that I wasn't a failure. It just makes me so upset sometimes thinking about it. This is like the reason kind of like why I don't speak to them. It's like, why the fuck did they let me do this? Like why were they so sure about kicking me out? When I got out of the military, I stayed in San Diego for about a year as a civilian before I moved back home. And I was like going to college. I moved back home and it was the first time my dad saw me. I had the flu. I was laying in bed. He came home from work. He was just like taking off his tie and he was just like looking at me like, this fucking piece of shit is back here. That's how he was looking at me. He didn't say hi. He didn't smile. He just looked at me like I was a piece of shit. And I was just like sick in bed. I had the flu and stuff like that. And he was just like staring me down. And he talked to me over the next week and he's like, yeah, you know, if you're gonna live in our house, you have to work. And I was like, well, I went into the military so I could go to college. I want to stay here and just finish up school, potentially save a little bit of money, and then like, you know, move out on my own or get my own place or whatever it is. And he's like, no, if you're going to stay here, you have to work. So I took a job. They were paying me like 35 fucking $1,000. I was like, fuck this. Why am I getting paid $35,000? You're an idiot. You just went through 3 fucking deployments in 4 years. Your goal is to go to college. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to go to school. While I was going to school, my parents, I guess, because they never went to college, they didn't understand school. They thought whenever I was home from my classes, I was sitting around doing nothing and I had all this free time in my hand. Meanwhile, I was like working on projects, I was working on homework, I was studying for tests. They would just like assign me like tons and tons of work to do around the house. They thought I was just like sitting around. And sometimes I'd tell them like, hey, I can't do that. Like, it's finals week. I gotta study. I have projects I gotta work on. And my parents were just like freaking out, telling me I'm a freeloader and I'm a piece of shit and all this other like random stuff. So I decided to just move out of the house again. And I'm like, you know what? Fuck this shit. And I decided to just live on my own. I went out with one of my uncles. I went to like, I don't know, I just went out with him and me and him were just having some drinks and we are just talking amongst ourselves. I was like, you know what? Like, fuck it. Like, I just want to get drunk tonight. Like, I don't give a shit. And my uncle says to me, he's like, you know what? It's a good thing your parents encouraged you to join the Navy. You're doing really good things for yourself now. And I was like, wait, my parents told you that they encouraged me to join the military to help me out? Wait, what? And he's like, yeah. And he was drunk and he's like telling me while he's drunk, he's like, yeah, you know, your parents told me that you were failing out of high school and that they encouraged you to join the military to change your life around. I'm like, wait, no, that's not what happened. What happened was I had a fucking 3.2 GPA. My grades were fine. They were kicking me out of the fucking house and I had no place to live. So that's why I joined the Navy. Turns out they told all of my family members that they encouraged me to join the fucking military. So I go through all this bullshit, and meanwhile, behind my back, they're lying to my family members, telling them that I'm a fucking failure, that I was failing out of high school. They were trying to be charitable and help me out. No, that's not what happened. I fucking joined the military on my own because I had nowhere to live. Once I found that out, man, I just stopped talking to my parents. They refused to apologize, and I'm like, you know what? If you're not going to apologize and you don't realize what you did was wrong, I have nothing to talk to you about. Being a kid is like almost like being a dog. If an owner beats their dog, the dog's still gonna come back at the end of the day. I feel like some parents take advantage of that and they treat their kids however the fuck they want and just expect their kids to come back. And like my parents' whole reasoning when I was like, hey, can you apologize or at least tell the family members that I wasn't failing high school and all this? They were like, no, you know, I'm your mother, you're the son, so when I do something, I'm your mom. I don't need to apologize to you. That's basically what it was at the end of the day. It's like, I'm your mom, I'm your dad. I don't need to apologize for shit. I fed you until you were 17 years old. It's like, that's the bare fucking minimum. You legally have to do that when you have a kid, you fucking psycho. Congrats. Like, congratulations. When I graduated college, I had this mindset in my head. If I make more money than my parents, I could prove to them I'm not a loser. I ended up getting a position where I was like making more than my parents. I told them about it. It didn't make me feel better. It was like a 10-year struggle. It was like get through the Navy, get through college, jump around to different positions. You're in IT, you're in tech, you could jump around to positions and just keep jumping around until you find a really good salary. And within 10 years, I went from the Navy to college to a really well-paying position. And I was like, you know what? Now my parents are gonna think I'm like not a failure. They're gonna accept me now, right? And they still didn't. If a stranger says some shit to you, you don't give a fuck, right? They're a stranger, who cares? But when your own parents, my own parents were more fucked up to me than my drill instructors in boot camp. I was fucking dealing drugs when I was 13. I was in the military and shit. Just growing up in Queens and going through the military, you encounter like a bunch of rough characters, right? And through both of those experiences, still the most fucked up people to date were my parents. Here's like an example, right? When I first got out of the Navy, I got a job as a systems engineer, okay? Because I was in IT in the Navy and I was running the IT infrastructure for a ship that had 3,000 fucking people. I got a job as a systems engineer right out of the Navy. I remember I was like telling my mom about it and she's like, yeah, you're not a systems engineer. You're probably just like, you know, a regular IT guy or something. And I was like, no, I'm a systems engineer. And I showed her my offer letter and it said systems engineer. She legitimately slapped it out of my hand. She screams at the top of her lungs, you're not a systems engineer. You fucking didn't graduate college. I don't know. Like shit like that just pisses me off. When I was like really little, I don't even know what it was about. We were living in this really small apartment in Queens and my mom like chased me through the small apartment and like cornered me and literally beat me so hard that she bruised her hand. Her whole hand was bruised. She came back like half an hour later and she's like, look what you fucking did in my hand, and she started hitting me again. I was like, what the fuck? Like, I remember I confronted my mom about why she told my family members that I was failing out of high school. And she just basically just said, you were. And she started like, she has this like crazy shrill, like top of the voice, like bloody scream. It's fucking horrific. Could be in a horror movie, man. She started screaming like, you were fucking failing out of school, blah, blah. I got pissed off. So I went to the high school. I got my transcript printed out. I went back to the house and I showed it to her. She would not look at it. She would not look at my transcript and she just kept yelling that I was a fucking failure. That's all she did. She wouldn't look at my transcript. She lived in complete denial about it and just continued to tell me I was a failure, you know? I realized this, like the less I talked to my parents, the better I became in my own life. Like the less mental health issues I had, the easier it was for me to focus on my profession, the easier it was for me to focus on my relationships and my friends. And on one side, it's like you want to maintain a relationship with your parents because at the end of the day, they're your parents and you're like biologically programmed to love them. But on the other side, it's like, hey, these are people that are just responsible for your mental degradation and they're not helping you in any way, shape, or form. I think if someone's just continually toxic, no matter who the fuck they are in your life, you should be able to just walk away. Like if it makes you, this is the main thing with like mental health, is like sometimes when you have mental health issues, you need to be selfish with your own emotions. Sometimes you don't have the energy to like put up with other people's bullshit. You got to be able to focus on yourself. And if somebody's draining that energy that you need desperately to focus on yourself and better yourself, you need to cut them out of your life.